What's good, YouTube? This is Boxingwave, all right? Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Also, hit that bell notification button so you'll be alerted whenever I drop new content, all right? Now look, I'm so tired of talking about the welterweight division, but it's just filled with drama. And I have a duty to keep you guys updated with what's going on. All right. Um, so I'm sure most of you heard because this has been news for the last couple of days. I did touch on it a little bit the other day about Keith Thurman and the WBC and the sanctioning bodies. All right. But I just want to update you guys, and plus I'm going to dig a little bit into the past of how this division has worked over the years and what's going on with the sanctioning bodies, because I believe with all the drama with Errol Spence and Terrence Bud Crawford, I believe that the politics is the source of the issue. Okay, I'm talking about the promoter and Al Heyman, and I also believe that the sanctioning bodies is the biggest issue when it comes to all of this. Okay, because this has been going on for a good amount of years, and I'm gonna dip a little bit into the past, but mostly speak about what's going on now, give you my views on it. I'm gonna touch on the facts, and I'm gonna give you my opinion on how I believe things should work. All right, but I understand boxing is a very corrupt business. But at the end of the day, it is a business at the end of the day, and I can see why these moves are getting made from a business standpoint, but for the fighters and their legacies, I think it's very unfair. All right. Now, the news, or the most recent news, is Keith Thurman. Keith Thurman. He was pushed up to the number one spot in the WBC sometime over the summer. All right. He fought Mario Barrios earlier this year. All right. It was some sort of like a title eliminator, but not a final eliminator. Okay. Basically, it was a tune-up, but they elevated it to being some sort of eliminator. Okay, even though Keith Thurman at that time hasn't been in the ring in 3 years, and the last time he was in the ring, he had lost to Manny Pacquiao back in 2019. Okay, he fought Josecito Lopez as a tune-up for Manny Pacquiao, beat him, and then fought Manny Pacquiao over the summer, lost the fight. Very good fight, by the way. And we haven't seen him in the ring until earlier this year when he fought Mario Barrios, who was coming off of a loss to Gervonta Tank Davis at 140. So Barrios has not done anything as a welterweight at all in his career, and he was coming off of a knockout loss to pretty much a lightweight. And then you had Keith Thurman was coming off a loss as well to Manny Pacquiao, which was 3 years ago. Okay, so he's been inactive. Mario Barrios is not a welterweight, and somehow Keith Thurman was elevated to the number one spot in the WBC this summer. Just like in a really sneaky way, in a random way, Keith Thurman just moved up to the number one spot over Virgil Ortiz, over Jerron Bruce Ennis, guys that's been actively fighting good fighters over the past few years. Keith Thurman is the number one guy. So the news of today, the WBA, who currently has a fighter that's been a mandatory, all right, Stanionis, Imantas Stanionis, all right, he beats Butayev, becomes the mandatory for the WBA, and once they were trying to make Spence against Bud, he chose to step aside to allow that undisputed fight to happen. All right? He chose to step aside. Now, the WBA tried to make him a mandatory in the past for your Dennis Ugas. All right? Your Dennis Ugas, who was a WBA champ. He was a super WBA champ. He was supposed to, Stanionis was supposed to fight Ugas for that WBA Super World title. Right, but instead, which in my opinion was the right thing to do, decided to have Butayev fight Stanionis for the true mandatory spot, which I thought was fair because it was just causing too much confusion at the time. All right, you guys had just won the fight against Manny Pacquiao, right, and at this point, they wanted to unify between Ugas and Spence. Right? So I thought the right move was to make, because Stanionis at that time was coming off a win against like Louis Collazo or something like that. I didn't think it was really justified. But beating Butayev at the time, I felt like it was a proper mandatory fight. And, and they were allowed to, for Ugas, who was coming off a win against Manny Pacquiao, to fight Errol Spence for unification, a 3-title unification, which Errol Spence won, right? So the news is the WBC, who has made Keith Thurman their mandatory to fight Errol Spence, is the WBA is now allowing for that WBC mandatory and Keith Thurman to fight Errol Spence. So now they're ordering Stanionis to fight Virgil Ortiz, which is what I stated the other day. Now he has to fight Virgil Ortiz Jr. All right? He's already stepped aside for Bud and Spence. He's already fought Butayev, all right, in place of fighting Ugas for the title. Now for a third time, he's being ordered, because he is the WBA world champion, right? Which is like the junior champion. And instead of fighting Errol Spence, which he was previously the mandatory for, he is being ordered to fight Virgil Ortiz, while they're approving the WBC mandatory, which is Keith Thurman, who just randomly became the mandatory because they just moved him up out of nowhere above Jerron Boots Ennis and Virgil Ortiz Jr. That's what's happening right now. So Errol Spence's, and I know there's other sanctioning bodies out there like the IBF, where Jerron Boots Ennis has petitioned for the IBF to order that fight against Errol Spence, because Errol has the IBF, the WBA. We didn't even get to Bud yet in that WBO title. Terrence Crawford holds one title, the WBO, all right? And Virgil Ortiz should be his mandatory very soon, if not already. All right? But let's just put Virgil Ortiz and Bud Crawford in the WBO over here for a second. Errol Spence holds the WBA, the IBF, and the WBC titles. And randomly, Keith Thurman gets slid in front of all of these other guys to fight Errol Spence Jr. Not Jerron Boots Ennis, not Virgil Ortiz, not Stanionis. All of those guys get pushed to the back while Keith Thurman gets his opportunity to fight Errol Spence Jr. This is being ordered by two sanctioning bodies right now, the WBC and the WBA. All right? This is getting approved. I don't know where the IBF stands on all this. The last time I've heard the IBF, Boots was basically petitioning to get that fight ordered. All right? So, and on top of that, I don't believe that Spence actually fought a mandatory for the IBF in quite some time. But that's a different story, right? I'm going to leave that out of this right now. So, look, if this is boxing, I mean, this is basically boxing corruption at its finest. You know, because let's speak on Keith Thurman real quick. Now, I know the obvious. Keith Thurman has been inactive. This is all of the things that, everybody's going to say, because it's true. Keith Thurman has been inactive. He lost to Manny Pacquiao. And why is he getting the number one spot? All right. I'm going to go back to Floyd Mayweather, and when Keith Thurman was one of the top dogs in the welterweight division. Was. All right. Because he isn't right now. All right. I think he's one of the top names in the welterweight division. But as far as activity, Keith Thurman hasn't beaten a relevant welterweight since Danny Garcia almost 6 years ago. March will be 6 years since the Danny Garcia fight. All right. He took 2 years off after that fight. Came back for Josecito Lopez. Struggled to win, but he won the fight. Lost to Manny Pacquiao right after. And then went another 3 years, came back and fought a junior welterweight that just got knocked out by a lightweight. But when we go back to 2017 and before that, what happened to Keith Thurman was pretty messed up. Keith Thurman, for years, he was the interim WBA champ, the world WBA champ, while Floyd was the WBA super welterweight champ. Okay? This is when the WBA was really a mess. I mean, I know they're trying to clean it up now a little bit, but as we can see, they're still struggling to remove the corruption that's going on with their sanctioning body. As we can see with this example here. Now, Keith Thurman, he's been wronged, you know, because he had a good amount of fights. All right, he was fighting guys like Leonard Bundu and Louis Collazo. You know, let me pull up his resume. Let me find him real quick. He's fighting these guys. This is back in like 2013, 2014. All right. Even before that, Diego Chavez, he was already the WBA interim champion. Jesus Soto Carras, WBA interim. Julio Diaz, Leonard Bundu. They elevated him to world welterweight champion, the WBA. Robert Guerrero, Louis Collazo, Sean Porter. All right? These are all quality fights. And it wasn't until the Danny Garcia fight where it was for the WBA Super World title fight. You know, because at that time, Floyd had already retired. All right? So Floyd, in the meantime, was fighting guys like, you know, he went up to 154 for Canelo. He fought Maidano a couple of times. He fought Andre Berto. You know, Keith was waiting for his spot. And what did Floyd do? Floyd says, you know, Errol, you know, Keith Thurman should fight Errol Spence. You know, who was on the come up and who was hungry and wanted Keith Thurman. And Keith is like, well, I want to fight you. So I understand where Keith was coming from. I remember when this was happening. You know, and I know Floyd was well accomplished, way more accomplished than Keith Thurman. Keith Thurman didn't prove anything but it's not the point. The point is Keith Thurman was wronged in this situation because Floyd was a super champion without fighting the regular champ for years. And now, look at what's happening right now. The same thing is happening right now with Stanionis and all these other fighters. It's not just him. It's Jaron Ennis. It's Virgil Ortiz Jr. Even though they're not WBA, it's the same situation because they're all number one or number two in their respective sanctioning body. But they're not getting a fight. Now, I've said this before. In my opinion, if you take the two former champions, all right, Keith was unified, you got your Dennis Ugas. If you put them in a mix with Jaron Ennis, Stanionis, Ortiz Jr., you know, maybe throw a Rashidi Ellis in there, or maybe a Alexis Rocha, or this guy, David Avenetian. The reason why I'm saying all these names, because all of these guys are Cody Crowdy. All of these guys have recent relevant wins. You know, Ortiz Jr., he's beaten, who did he beat? He beat Kavalaskis. You know, he beat Maurice Hooker. You know what I'm saying? He beat, who else did he beat? He beat a few people. You know, I'm trying to do all of this off the top of the head. All right, Jaron Ennis, he's beaten Delorme and he beat the Samurai, the Russian fighter. I can't think of all their names right now, and I apologize. But basically, all of these fighters have at least one or two relevant, and have been active wins against someone. Now, Keith Thurman, I'm not saying he can't be in a mix. All right, but let him prove himself right now. He's old news, you know. But at least like guys like Ugas, who's been around for a long time, maybe not as a welterweight, but he's been a good amount of years. He's been there as a welterweight, and he's a former champion. Let them get their fights off. At least Ugas, until the Spence fight, he's been pretty active. You know, you pull up all these guys. Ortiz Jr., who did he fight? He's beaten Herrera at welterweight, Orozco, Brad Salomon, Sammy Vargas, Maurice Hooker, even Conor Benn. I mean, I know he's all messed up with his drug situation right now, but even these are guys that have decent wins over Keith Thurman. If you look at Keith Thurman since his win over Danny Garcia, all right, in the past 3 or 4 years, these guys have done more than Keith Thurman. I know he's a former unified, but he lost the fight and came back and fought a lightweight. He lost a fight to Manny, came back and fought a lightweight and beat him. A lightweight that's just knocked out. I'm sorry, a super or a junior welterweight. All right? But you got Virgil Ortiz, McKinson, Velasquez, Hooker. You know, then you got Jerron Ennis. Who do you have? He has Castillo Clayton, Delorme, Limpinez. That's what I was thinking. Van Herden. You know, that was a no contest, but you know, whatever. We know how that fight was going. All right. Then you got guys like Stanionis, who's beaten Butayev, right? Butayev, undefeated, Collazo, Delorme. You know, I mean, they're more relevant than what Keith has been doing over the years. You know, Conor Benn even, Herden, Algieri, Granados, Samuel Vargas, Sebastian Formella. You know what I'm saying? This is what more than what Keith Thurman. I can keep going. You know, David Avanesian, even with him, you know, he stopped Josh Kelly, who was undefeated at the time. You know, now all these guys, I'm not familiar with all these other fighters that he's beaten and knocked out. Well, he's coming off of like 6 knockout wins to fight Terrence Crawford. That's still more than what Keith Thurman has done in the last 5 years. You know, even Alexis Rocha. You know, even Rashidi Ellis, he has a win over Alexis Rocha. You know what I'm saying? This is what I'm saying. He beat Blair Cobbs. I know it might not be a hell of a win, but Blair Cobbs went on to beat Maurice Hooker. You know, it's still something. These guys are actively fighting. All of these guys, as far as recently, what have you done recently? All these guys, Velasquez is another guy. What has Keith Thurman done recently? Now, if Errol Spence was just fighting Keith Thurman as a voluntary fight, like the way Terrence Bud Crawford is with David Avanesian, if it was just a voluntary fight, and he says, you know what, I'm gonna fight Keith Thurman, yo, you know what, the plan spoiled with Terrence Bud Crawford. All right, they spoiled, you know, things didn't work out, you know, whatever way you guys want to blame it, I'm done arguing. I already made my stance, and when it comes to that, I'm siding with Crawford when it comes to that, being that I believe that Al Heyman, the negotiations with that and how listening to both sides of the field and looking at the history of all this, I side with Crawford. I'm not saying Crawford wasn't wrong in any of this, but when I'm saying at the end of it, I side with Crawford when it comes to that, when it comes to Spence. But I'm blaming Al Heyman. I'm not blaming Spence. All right? But with that being said, if Spence says, I'm going to have a fight because this Keith Thurman, this Crawford fight fell apart, and I want to get back in the ring, and I'm going to stay at welterweight, and I want to keep my titles. All right? If it was involuntary and he says, I'm going to fight Keith Thurman, you know what? Whatever. It's not what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for Crawford to fight David Avanesian either. But I would understand it as opposed to these guys, the WBC and the WBA, just randomly coming out and saying, yo, Keith Thurman is next. Where did he come from? How? Based on what? All those fighters, I just named you like 10 fighters, have done more than what Keith Thurman has did. That Mario Barrios win is probably the weakest win out of the other top 10 fighters in this welterweight division right now in the past few years. The weakest one. You take any of their best wins, because the reality is Keith Thurman's last 2 wins in the past 5 years has been against Josecito Lopez and Mario Barrios. In the last 5 years. You can't tell me any of those top 10 fighters, their best wins, is not better than those 2 wins. Starting with all the way down from Kavaliauskas to Rocha to Ellis to Butayev to Stanionis to Ben Avanesian. All of those guys got a better win on their resume than those 2 wins. I'm not dissing what Keith Thurman has done in his career. I'm very aware of what Keith Thurman. I've been following him for way before I even had a YouTube channel. But as far as the last 5 years, no. Keith Thurman doesn't deserve the shot ahead of those guys. So how he got screwed with Floyd, these other fighters are getting screwed just how he got screwed. Why? Because he has a name. And if he's out here, you got Crawford and his team basically said he turned down, a fight, or he requested $10 million for fighting Crawford. And now Team Boots are saying the same thing. They turned, he asked for $10 million. If you fight Spence, you're not even going to get $10 million to fight Errol Spence Jr. You didn't get $10 million to fight Manny Pacquiao. That's what Pacquiao got to fight you. Excuse me. So what's going on? This is bullshit. The mandate is bullshit. The fight is whatever. Whatever. It's not a bad name to have on your resume. I'm not going to complain on that. It doesn't hurt Spence's resume at all. I mean, I believe both need the fight. I think Bud and Spence need the fight for their legacies. Regardless of what Bud says, what Max Kellerman or what Spence says, I believe that they both need the fight for their legacy. I know that they can retire. I know that Bud is going to be a Hall of Famer. All right? But people are going to remember this fight over the other ones. It's the biggest one. People are going to remember that. Same thing with Spence. Having a win over Sean Porter is not going to cut it. If you retire tomorrow and we think back of like who you beat, your best win was Sean Porter. These guys need to fight. They need to fight. Now, if they don't fight, whatever. They could go on and do other things, but the Keith Thurman fight is not bad. The David Avanesian fight is not bad. It's just that there are better fights out there. And for them to mandate this fight is kind of ridiculous over the people that is more deserving of it. The other mandatories, especially Stanionis, I mean, at this point, he needs to get his lawyers involved. What's going on? He needs to get his lawyers involved because they will continue to push you back. And if you fight, if Virgil Ortiz agrees with it, which I believe they will. I don't know what Virgil Ortiz is doing. Real quick, let's go over the other options here. Spence don't have to take this. Actually, hasn't officially been announced that Spence is going to fight Keith Thurman. Spence has publicly said he does not want to fight Keith Thurman. Or he basically doesn't want to give him the opportunity. Right? Because I guess when he wanted the opportunity, Keith didn't want to give him one. That's because Keith was chasing Floyd Mayweather. And he was getting screwed for years. All right? Whatever way you feel about that, but those videos are still up. I have videos talking about that from back then. All right, but the way Spence still hasn't officially announced that he's fighting Keith Thurman. I've said to you guys in several videos now, it's like, I don't even know if Spence stays at 147 if he's not going to fight Terrence Bud Crawford. Because even if you beat Keith Thurman, you're still going to be ordered to fight the winner of Virgil Ortiz and Stanionis, which is not a bad fight. Or you're probably going to get ordered by the IBF. At some point, you're going to get stripped of a title or two. There's no way you're going to keep all three of those titles. One or two of those titles are going to be stripped. You're going to have to. Because if you beat Keith, you're going to have the winner of Ortiz Jr. and Stanionis and Boots Ennis with the IBF. So even if you're trying to fight Bud Crawford, I'm not saying that fight can't happen and they can't revisit the fight. But if they revisit the fight, it will be under different circumstances when it comes to the titles. Because these guys are not going to fall for the old okie doke again, like, yo, I'll step aside. No, that's done. Boots is not going to step aside for you. Stanionis is not going to step aside again. He's already said it. And then what's up with Virgil Ortiz? He's being ordered to fight Stanionis while he's basically right around the corner from fighting, being able to order, or petition to get the Bud fight with the WBO. Does he take the Stanionis fight, or does he wait for Bud to beat, or the winner of Bud and Avenesian to get this WBO shot? It's a mess. This whole division is a complete mess right now. And honestly, as a fan, I think the titles don't mean anything. I mean, it's so many fighters. I'm still waiting to see what Rashidi Ellis is going to do. I know he has a fight coming up. It's rumored it's going to be against Duran Ennis. I mean, that is a great fight. I've said to you guys in the very beginning of all of this Spence Bud talk, when the fight got canceled, I said that I felt like a lot of these fighters in the top 10 should be facing each other instead of waiting around for Bud and Spence. Duran Ennis, Virgil Ortiz, Conor Ben, who's out for the moment, but Rashidi Ellis, you put him in that group. Stanionis, you put him in the group. All right, Avenesian, he's fighting Bud, but all of these guys should be facing each other. And Keith Thurman, and I said Keith Thurman and your Dennis Ugas should be facing each other. Two former champions. If they're not going to fight one of the younger up-and-coming guys, that should have been a fight that should have went down. Ugas is coming off of a loss. Keith is coming off of a win against a light welter. That fight would have made much sense instead of, this, but it's like they're forcing a fight, an easy fight for Spence, because right now it's an easy fight for Spence. I'm not even sure how Keith Thurman looks against these other top 10 guys. And a problem with Keith is not just inactivity, it's just we've seen exactly what your weakness is over and over again in every single fight. Barrios, Lopez, Pacquiao, all had Keith hurt bad to the body. Had him retreating. 3 fights in a row. All right, it started with Louis Collazo. All right? We know exactly what Spence is going to do. Stylistically, this is a terrible matchup. From a style standpoint, Errol Spence is literally the worst opponent for Keith Thurman right now. Because that's one of the best in the game when it comes to going to the body. But even if you didn't fight Spence, if you fought Ugas, if you fought Ortiz, if you fought Ennis, if you fought Stanionis, if you fought Conor Ben, if you fought David Avenesian, if you fought Alexis Rocha, If he fought Rashidi Ellis, they're all going to dig to his body. They know exactly what to do. So from Keith's standpoint, I understand why the way he's moving, the way he's moving, because he's trying to avoid that smoke and get one big title fight for millions before he heads out. He's going to be out the game. So I understand where he's coming from, but for the sanctioning bodies to allow that and enforce a Keith Thurman fight against Errol Spence, that's ridiculous. Over all of these other guys, it's ridiculous. What are we doing? And I see people online, all you guys are so stupid. The majority of you are sitting there arguing about who's a better opponent, Keith Thurman or David Avenesian. That's the only thing you're arguing about. You guys are so focused on Errol and Bud Crawford and still arguing every day because you got nothing else to talk about because you're not real boxing fans. You sit there and argue about two or three fighters every single day because you got nothing else. We have nothing else to talk about. There's a bunch of fights coming on this weekend and y'all arguing every day about a fight that's not even happening. But now y'all arguing about who's better, Keith Thurman or David Avenesian. What? All right, let me clear that up real quick. Keith Thurman, as far as his name, as far as his resume, as far as what he's done in his prime, he trumps David Avenesian in every category. But in 2022, 2023, I have no idea who wins that fight. David's coming off 6 knockout wins, including one against one of the top welterweight prospects. I don't know what happens right now. All I know is I didn't expect Josecito Lopez to give Keith Thurman so much trouble. I didn't expect Mario Barrios to go the distance with Keith Thurman after getting knocked out by Tank Davis and hurting him on top of that. I didn't expect any of that. So when David Avenesian, who I rate over Mario Barrios for sure, you know, and Josecito Lopez, you can't sit here and tell me that it's foolish to think that Avenesian is a better opponent right now. It's a really easy argument to make. Like, Keith, career-wise, absolutely. Right now, I don't know where he's at. He looked good against Barrios overall. Yeah, he looked good. But it was Mario Barrios. He looked good, but it was Mario Barrios. He looked good against Josecito Lopez, but it was Josecito Lopez, who was a good fighter. So was Mario Barrios, but they're good. But did you guys see what Keith Thurman was able to do in his prime? That's not the same guy. That's not, you can't sit here trying to convince me that's the same guy. It's not the same guy. Oh my God. Anyway, I gotta get on out of here, man. I don't know what Bud is gonna do right now. Not Bud, Spence. I don't know what Spence is gonna do because when you're holding 3 titles, I don't know what he's gonna do. I don't know what he's gonna do. It's just, even if you fight Keith Thurman and beat him, it's just like you still. It's just buying you more time to do what exactly? You know, what exactly is going to happen? You know, can we revisit the Crawford fight? If we can revisit the fight, just know that it will not be an undisputed fight. Do you risk staying at 147 for that? And this is what I said to you guys before. Do you risk staying down at 147 for a Crawford fight when it's not going to be undisputed? If your chances would probably be better at 154 because you won't be as drained. The Crawford fight can be revisited if negotiations go well and everyone is happy. But it can happen in a weight that you favor because of your size. You know? you're going to stay at 147, you got all these obligations to make. You're not saying you have to make it, but what are you going to be staying at 147 for if you don't have all these titles? At this point, I just want the fights to be made. I don't even care about the whole undisputed thing. Welterweight, we haven't had an undisputed champion since Zab Judah, maybe? You know, I don't know. It's been years. Pacquiao didn't do it. Floyd didn't do it. All right, so I don't know. I don't know what Spence is really on Spence, but he doesn't have as many belts. You know, but Spence got more options to me because he has more belts. You have 154, who is majority PBC fighters anyway. You have Virgil Ortiz, that I feel at some point is going to be a huge Dallas Stadium fight that I would like to go to. I'm waiting for that fight to happen at some point. You know, or do you just can the WBC and say, you know what? Me and Virgil could fight. We don't even need to deal with the sanctioning bodies. You know? That's another thing too. It's like, when do the fighters start at some point to saying, you know what, we're the fighters here. These guys got names big enough to have these fights without the sanctioning bodies who want their money. You know, if Ryan and this guy Tank Davis could come to some kind of agreement to have a fight, and they both fight on different promoters who are at odds with each other and different networks, who's to say that they can't make a Virgil Ortiz Errol Spence fight and just leave the sanctioning bodies out of it? Because at this point, it seems to me that the sanctioning bodies, especially in the welterweight division, the lightweight division, you know, they're kind of messing up everything that's going on. Even the heavyweight division, they're the problem. Them and the promoters, the politics. So one of these guys gonna be like, yo, you know what? Whatever. You know, because Spence is not going to stick around and fight all of these guys. Let's be real. He's not going to fight Boots, or Ortiz, Thurman, Stanionis. He's not going to fight all of them. He's going to fight one, maybe two down the line. All right? All right. This video was a lot longer than what I expected it to be, but I just wanted to clear all of that stuff up. I'm out of here, man. Again, subscribe to the channel. Please hit that thumbs up. Hit that like button if you like the content. Share the video. Hit me on the social media. And I'll see you guys later. Peace.